This is the Check for Track podcast. I'm Josh.
And I'm Aaron.
And we went to see The Irishman. I mean, you can't overstate how large an event this is in film history. This is one of the late movies of Martin Scorsese. While he does have other plans on the table, he has said this may be his last movie. He doesn't even know. And it also marks the coming together for the first time of, Hollywood royalty. It's got Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci has come back out of retirement. It could not be a bigger deal. It's been getting excellent reviews, 4 stars, 5 stars. Haven't really seen any negativity. I think that's great. I'm glad people are enjoying it. I'm a massive Scorsese fan. That was really one of the places where I kind of got my start in loving movies. I know that Aaron's a big fan of a lot of his movies as well. I don't like this movie, and I think it's actually a massive shame, and I don't want to be a naysayer, but I'm surprised that it's caught on as well as it has with audiences. And I think the tech is great. I think the possibilities are there, but I actually think it's quite broken, and I'm pretty upset about that, because this might be it. I mean, even if he does make more movies, nothing on a scale like this, surely. So that's the direction that I'm coming at. Yeah. Aaron?
We both saw this. I decided to, like a week and a half before we saw this, I decided to read the book, and I devoured that book. The book is called I Heard You Paint Houses by Charles Brandt.
Yes.
I think in the book there's loads of really interesting stuff. I would suggest anyone read it, and obviously I'd suggest anyone watch this film before we begin. I think it's, irrespective, and I agree with you. I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would either. But irrespective, it's certainly an experience, and you see some real performances from, like you said, some old masters at points, and they make them older still. Yeah. But yeah, one thing I want to begin with from the book, I think is really interesting. And again, this, like much of the book, this is largely unsubstantiated. In fact, I've not been able to find this from any other source other than I Heard You Paint Houses, and possibly, I haven't got access to it yet, but a book called The Quiet Dawn by Matthew Birkbeck. A seemingly touted urban legend that Russell Buffalino, played by Joe Pesci in this film, had the final say over the final drafts of The Godfather. He was also instrumental in getting a friend of his into a role in The Godfather. I can't remember the role specifically at the moment.
It was like the lounge singer.
Yeah, and they're saying such was his power and prestige. And I tell you what, but Russell Buffalino could have used final say over was this film. I think he would have made it a lot more consistent. If I was him watching it, I'd be like, I'm confused by my own life right now. It's like, when did I do what? Yeah, the film has some real laudable elements. Nearly goes without saying that I think all 3 of the big stars put in really great performances.
That's right.
Robert De Niro manages to be imposing despite being 7 inches shorter than Frank Sheeran was. Joe Pesci is wonderfully subdued as Russell Buffalino, and Al Pacino is still my show, at least, with just a bloody electric Jimmy Hoffa. He felt like he could, well, at least to me, I felt like he could walk away and do anything and say anything. Like, he was acting so naturalistic.
See, Pacino as Hoffa being such a revelation is so bittersweet for me, because I found many aspects of this movie's plot quite confusing and the context quite confusing, but since having researched it more, my God, the character, the man Jimmy Hoffa, is such a fascinating person and figure in the last century's history that I feel really let down that such an excellent performance couldn't have been let loose in a better movie.
Definitely.
That's what's a shame about it, because it was really good, and he was such a bizarre man, and not necessarily, while on the surface, being responsible for ordering, lots of criminal activity, he wasn't the same as your classic Scorsese character. He was, and this could have been the heart of the movie, he was more principled, he had strange principles, and this was what drove, I guess, the conflict between him and the more, standard gangsterish Scorsese movie characters that are in this film and in this story. And yeah, I think that's very interesting.
Agree. I think the fact he is a union man, and the fact that he essentially tries to use the mafia as a double-edged sword to secure workers' rights, and does successfully use that same threat of violence and corruption to obtain workers' rights. It's such a excellent tale for the modern era. Not like a morality play or anything. I guess you could paint it as such, but just the sheer concept of a man so dedicated to just, 2 versions of it, either securing workers' rights or enhancing his own prestige, or both. Yeah, that he was willing to invite these people into his house, and then, if you believe the version of events in this film, that those same people eventually destroying him is fascinatingly tragic and wonderful. Yeah, you can almost see why he should be the main character of this, but again, the main character is Frank, and and it works. It certainly works in the book better than it does
Could have worked better.
Exactly, than the film. But this film comes with a lot of things attached to it. It comes with a book and obviously a very real history, a very debated history that was kept very secret for many years, and only in the last 20 years or so, when many of the principal participants have started to die out, has come out in any stretch. Hoffa being one of the greatest disappearance mysteries of the second half of the 20th century.
Yep.
And it's interesting to me that this will be the definitive narrative of that for our generation. Definitely something that I don't think Frank Sheeran could have envisaged. Inadvertently, through these confessions that he made to Charles Brandt, he has extended the cultural lifespan of him and his friends, and possibly even given them some sort of limited form of immortality.
It's a real mixed bag, even outside of the actual movie. Because you're right, it has lent... We didn't know who Jimmy Hoffa was. No. You're a massive socialist.
Exactly, I'm a socialist, I'm a history nerd, and somehow, I mean, maybe you could argue I'm a poor one of both of those. I didn't know either of them. I didn't know anything about him, really.
I'm going to be more specific about what didn't work about this movie for me. The thing is Martin Scorsese, in the gangster pictures, so specifically in Goodfellas and Casino rather than Mean Streets, he said himself, I've never made a movie with a plot up until he made The Departed. And that was kind of a fun thing for him to say, because while it's true he didn't make movies that had standard act structures or standard story beats, they worked anyway, and they still took you on an emotional journey with the character, even though it was just scene to scene, loads of madness. But there was a dream logic, or kind of like a music video logic to Goodfellas, where it didn't get boring and it also wasn't confusing. The context of the time periods made sense, what the characters wanted, even when it wasn't much, or why they could or couldn't get something they wanted, made sense. There was always the perfect balance struck between exposition explaining something and showing something, because he often tells when he could show, and it works because it lets you into the narrator, into, if they're unreliable or just what they have to say about something. So he is great at that. Yep. In The Irishman, it may have been too long because I was pissed off within, I'm going to roughly say it was like the first third, which is a long time of a 3.5 hour movie, because I didn't understand a lot of what was happening. I kind of got the general thrust, but characters would say, oh, we want Cuba back because we want our casinos. And I was like, okay, I'm not familiar with the period, and also this film hasn't told me what happened to, like, what their vested interest in. So that was difficult, and I'd be like, don't worry about that, we'll get onto this later. Then Hoffa showed up, and Hoffa was great, but what kind of Frank's involvement in the union seemed largely absent, and I didn't really understand this conflict between the mob guys and the union guys, or where it was union guys and where it was mob guys. And it was so much context. For a movie that was so long, they really didn't establish a lot of quite important things. And, why there even was a rift between the union guys and the mob guys wasn't entirely clear until sort of, towards the end. And then in addition to that, with the mob guys, they talked about how they elected Kennedy and how they did all this electoral fraud. And immediately in the story, the Kennedy administration goes after them really, really hard. And as an audience member, I didn't feel like that was treated as an enormous faux pas. And I had to get loads of context on it afterwards. So people were doing things and I didn't really know why they were doing them. It was, little standard Scorsese beats that seemed out of context and incoherent. It wasn't all bad, but it was difficult to get that far into a movie before being properly invested.
I agree. I think that maybe because this covers so much of history, and Frank Sheeran says he was present for so much of it, that he, in the same way that he would do in like Goodfellas or something, he runs through loads of scenes that all have loads of really important context, but it's just doesn't dedicate the time to explaining them, and instead decides to focus on laborious shots of people eating ice cream. Those helped to an extent to get us into the head of the characters and to show that these characters have lives, and
he's good at that.
Yeah, he is. But again, like, there wasn't a balance here. Like, I think maybe getting a bit wistful, sentimental. There was a lot of like being old and looking after children in this. I felt like he was all like the Charles Brandt always walks you through pretty clearly why these given people were reacting how they were to different situations, which is something this film doesn't do. And I get that it's not a smooth transition from book to film, but I mean, we know Scorsese can do this, and it's pretty appalling. Great, yeah, exactly. It's pretty appalling that he didn't. I think actually one thing I want to ask you is, you said obviously this film's been doing really well. I'm also glad to hear it, and I always find this really interesting. What do you think people are seeing when they walk into this film? Because I agree with you. I don't think people are understanding all of the historical context, or if they do, then I've vastly underestimated the majority of the population and their knowledge of 70s Teamster politics.
Well, that's the thing, and I'd just like to quickly establish something before I answer that question. When I was watching this movie, I was disappointed in myself. I was like, you should know this. I mean, you know that Castro was in power, you broadly know about the Bay of Pigs, why don't you get this? When I spoke to Aaron afterwards, not only does he know the history, he's read the book, and he said, if I had not known, those things would have been largely incoherent, and you agreed that that was something of a failing. So, I really don't know what... I don't know what people... I don't know what the movie does consistently that people could catch on to. I think it does find its feet. Spoilers. I mean, it's not a spoiler because the movie's about, the assassination of Jimmy Hoffa, but in the lead up to that, where there's no going back, and then Frank living beyond that, it's not perfect, but it kind of becomes a thing. But I don't really feel like that was connected, as I've said to you. I don't think the end of the movie was connected to the beginning of the movie. So I don't know what people like about it. And the thing is, I have too much respect for people to just say, I know that this kind of goes against what we said in the Blade Runner 2049 review, but I don't just want to say that people saw cool Scorsese bits and some jokes and some, classic Scorsese beatdowns like, if you touch her again, you're dead, that kind of thing, and went like clapped like seals and went, oh, good movie. But at the same time, I don't know, Aaron.
Do you want my theory?
Go on.
It'd be funny if you said no, actually. I shouldn't offer you the rhetorical question. My theory is that I think that people really enjoyed some prestige performances for some really good actors.
Yes.
I think they enjoyed some vaguely snappy editing, and I think, frankly, that you and I specifically are perhaps the ability to know some of it and not all of it is more detrimental to the watching of the film than not knowing any of it. I think if you don't know any of it, you can probably enjoy the film. And I spoke to someone who said they knew nothing about it. It's not that they weren't confused, but they sort of accepted that confusion because they're like, it's stuff happened in history. I don't know it. I'll just enjoy what's in front of me. And so I think perhaps when you know either none of the story or most of the story, it's better. But if you're in that halfway point, then I think it becomes a wild ride of frustration because you're trying to contextualize stuff and you have a bit. But you don't have it all, and so you're just like, this is ridiculous.
Well, because I wanted to know. I thought it'd be good. It's like, mob interest in Cuba. So for clarity, I now know that under Batista, Batista,
the wrestler, yep, immortal God Emperor Batista.
They had just loads and loads of casinos, and they were in hock with the government, with the state at the time, and it was making them lots of money. But under Castro, they didn't, and so they even funded. They put money and guns into Bay of Pigs as the mob alongside JFK to try and get it back, and I think that's very interesting. But I didn't know, and it didn't tell me. All it told me was Joe Pesci says we need to get Cuba back, and it's like, okay, why? Just something about casino, okay. But the other thing, I guess, that was kind of the 1-2 hit for me, if I can be as well charitable to the people who like the movie, is I guess that what I was waiting for from The Irishman, and you can hear about this in the Winter 2019 prediction podcast, is that I was waiting for it to show me what it was going to do that hadn't been done in Goodfellas and Casino. And the stuff that was enjoyable about it, I guess, the problem is that the character beats and the kind of gangland, like tragedy of it, had been explored in Goodfellas and Casino to different extents, and the thing that this movie had going for it that was going to make it different was Hoffa and the union stuff. And I know how much of that stuff was in the books, and they even say Frank was arrested 27 times at a picket line. They don't show things like that, and I wanted I wanted this movie because it on paper it was obviously about the conflict between this union guy and the organized crime that he allowed to. In fact, the Union was practically a fifth column in America, and then he allowed a fifth column of mobsters to arise in it. And it's, that was kind of Hoffa's downfall. Even though it worked for the workers for a while, like it couldn't last. He went to jail, he came back out, it didn't belong to him anymore. That's what's fascinating about it. Scorsese is too comfortable in padded, couched, dimly lit restaurants with Italian people drinking wine and talking about hits. This movie needed more of the on-the-ground meat and potatoes, union violence, union takeovers, union control.
Strike breaking, and then getting in mobsters to prevent strike breaking, and then those same mobsters being rewarded posts. Yeah, exactly. Like you said, the forging of pay for locals into the election of people like Tony Pro into positions within the mafia and the union, and that gradual molding of the two. Like you could make a really good crime epic about that, but yeah, like you said, I don't think that's really what Scorsese wanted. And again, he read that book and he didn't see a union story, he saw a mob story.
I was just going to say, you've said that to me quite a few times now, and I don't want to believe it, but it really, the nail is in the coffin now. I think that you are right. Like, to me, it seems confusing that you, even just from a newcomer's perspective, that you could tell the story of Hoffa without thinking that one of the key things was, unions. I mean, I know that he was, you know, he wasn't a silent partner. He wasn't ignorant. He was well into the organised crime aspect of it, but he wanted good pensions and good salaries for his workers. It's just that he was quite singular in that and was willing to get that by any means possible. But, you know, there is a dark socialism aspect to that story, which is the heart of the story, which is also the heart, incidentally, of Frank, Robert De Niro's character's conflict. It tears him apart at the end because he's torn between the gangster part of him and the union man part of him, but that ripping apart of his character isn't set up well enough and it isn't clear enough. And so what was otherwise, you know, I really like the build up to the assassination scene, and I really like the assassination, but I just so much more of it. I mean, when he was on the phone with Hoffa's wife, who by the way is played by the babysitter from Goodfellas, time waits for no one, her being like, where is he? And he's like, I don't know, just stay positive. That was an okay moment that could have been so much better, because it should have been a fuck. What the fuck have I done?
Yeah.
What the fuck have I done?
Yeah, definitely.
That's me. Sorry.
No, yeah. When he was on the phone, like I was like, I should be feeling a lot more than I am right now. Perhaps it gets a bit swept up in the sort of Forrest Gump-esque aspect. I know people have called Frank Sheeran the mobster's Forrest Gump, if everything that he witnessed and did actually happened. Yeah, obviously it shows many different, you know, murders. It shows the murder of Crazy Joe Gallia. It shows the murder of Albert Anastasia in the barbershop. It shows the murder of Columbo at the Italian American rally. None of those three murders really have anything to do with the story of Jimmy Hoffa or Frank Sheeran and Russell Bufalino.
And that's the really annoying part for me, because I was watching these bits. I didn't know why they were relevant, or if they would be relevant later.
They're just
or if
famous
they were just
people. So that's the annoying thing, is they are, like, you know, like Albert Anastasia's barbershop thing. That doesn't really inform any given aspect of the film thereafter.
No.
I mean, it was obviously a big deal, but it was probably a big deal to Scorsese and the people making this film, but not to the lives of the characters involved.
It's hard to put properly into words though, because I appreciate that not every scene that you see in Goodfellas has some kind of overall contribution to, you know, the direction of the story, but it always tells you something, you know, like Billy Batts. Well, actually, yeah, because it does and it doesn't, because Billy Batts is just more like tough guy mobster stuff, and, you know, that leads later to they've got to dig him up. They have to keep it secret because he was a made guy. And then how about Spider? So Spider in Goodfellas is just the guy who brings them drinks. And then too many times, you know, Nicky, played by, Joe Pesci, too many times he just goes crazy. And once he shoots him in the foot, and the next time, because he gives him lip, he shoots him in the head. And the thing is, that doesn't need to be in there. But the reason it's in there is because it shows that at the beginning, you know, we know that Joe Pesci's crazy, but we all kind of put up with it. But it's just he's getting too crazy. He's going too overboard, and overboard. He's not slowing down. He's getting worse, and something needs to be done. These murders, I was just like, it's a civil rights protest, and that guy had to die, and this thing, and just very disjointed, unfortunately.
No,
man,
no,
I can't
definitely.
believe I'm saying this.
No, yeah, it's unfortunate, and the more you think about it, like you said, the more missed opportunities you see. I'm gonna ask more people about this. I want a plurality of opinions, and obviously, you know, if you are listening, you psychopath, then please leave a comment. Like, does a lack of knowledge about this film enhance the viewing experience? Because I can imagine that it would, because then you don't get to focus on as much of that, and you can just enjoy it as a fable, which again is what some people would argue you should see it as, but just a fable that happens to not only purport to be true. And that's, again, controversially, this film does market itself as the true story of the Hoffa murder, which I think is bold. I think is acceptable to my knowledge, other than People Against People, which is seemingly, from my brief sojourn into mafia history, is the entire of mafia historiography is just a person debates another person because each of their sources said a different thing.
Yes.
There's barely anything written, which is fascinating in terms of how you could historiography around that. But yeah, so I guess for as legitimate as mafia stories go, they can tout it as such, and I know obviously the publisher of the book defends it quite rabidly. But I do think it's really interesting that, you know, for something that is purportedly true, and for something that is clearly, like, you know, like, you pass loads of historical points, like, you know, we go from World War II, and obviously in the book Frank Sheeran grows up in the Depression, so you go from sort of like the Depression all the way through to the invasion of Iraq playing at the bottom of the Fox News thing in Frank Sheeran's. So, you know, it's a real birth of American history is present, and, you know, a wonderful story. I can see why Robert De Niro said he doesn't care if it's true, because it's such a meaningful American tale.
Saga, and I do agree with that. I definitely agree with that.
To do that, you need to pay homage to those things that you're citing. You can't just meaninglessly, you know, cite Cuba or the Bay of Pigs or the Kennedy assassination, Robert Kennedy, the unions, Watergate, the there's like so many things that it invokes and discards that you've either got to take it as being unconcerned with telling a coherent story or just like completely incompetent, and neither is that good. Obviously, I guess one is better because it's intent, but you have to ask yourself, what was Martin Scorsese trying to portray at that point? Because I certainly don't think he did the life of Frank Sheeran justice, as Frank Sheeran told it. I guess he captured the essence of certain parts of these characters' lives, but it certainly didn't catch the arc that Frank Sheeran tries to portray the three of them as having been on.
Yes.
And as such, and it's not like he replaces that with a better arc or his own version of the arc. Basically, the only thing that combines them all in any sense is the opinion of the daughter on Hoffa and Buffalino, respectively, in that she liked one and didn't like the other. And I guess that's supposed to represent Frank's fall or wrong decision. I don't know what the movie's trying to tell me with that.
From what Aaron has told me about this book, of which we've had extensive conversation, and also the pretty serious, like, ravenous research that I've been doing into Hoffa and the period, the Buffalinos, and then, just wider Frank stuff. The problem is it is such a sprawling and interesting story, and you could get some key points out of it when deciding to tell that story. But the thing that's most surprising is all that's happened is they've taken something that's really varied and very unique and would have been a great high point for Scorsese, and then they've just put it in a Scorsese straitjacket that actually suppresses a lot of what's interesting about it and a lot of what would make it work.
Yeah.
The best thing I can say about it is that the elderly Frank stuff with regards to, he just lives beyond this murder, lives beyond his family being interested in him, becomes an old guy in a home who isn't really sure about how he's lived his life, is interesting. And that, again, they've never really gone that far with a Scorsese movie before, so that could have been the shit. Even then, not as well executed as I wish that it was.
Because like you said, that stuff was some of the best, and even that was so half-formed compared to how I thought it could have been. Because like you said, if that was supposed to be the central thrust, to co-opt your word, of this narrative, then it could have at least started like that. If you didn't come here for a rewrite, I apologize, but I think like one way to really do that would have been to start with a surrogate for Charles Brandt, if he doesn't want his own name attached to this. I imagine he would. He seems like the kind of guy who does.
Yeah.
If you like have him talking to Frank, have them meeting. Like, their meeting is fascinating. He is, as he tells it, associates of Frank from the unions and the mob contact him to get him out of prison on medical practices, because the man's dying. The man's like becoming ever more crippled in this horrible state penitentiary that he quite rightly earned himself a place in.
Jesus.
He frees him from that, and then Frank tries to fuck him out of a fee. He's like, "Oh, I'll pay you if you do another case," and he's like, "No, fuck off." And then they leave each other, and that's the bit where I told you that the guy said no one speaks to Frank Sheeran like that.
Yeah.
And then that's when Frank decides to contact him. They spend a night together talking about loads of stuff, and then Frank gets spooked and doesn't talk about anything for 8 years, as Charles Brandt tells it, until he contacts him again. He's even older, he's even more dying now. And then they go spend like a couple of years going through the entire thing very slowly. They also drive and visit the house together, the Hoffa house.
That's a really interesting anecdote.
A really interesting tale in the book is that visit. Frank, that's where the peace conversation I was telling you about earlier. Like, Frank is he's basically like sort of like semi-demented at this. He's taking medication that sometimes makes him see people, and as they go into Detroit, the way Brandt writes it is he started to get concerned that he was in danger because of that, and that's where he asks for a gun. Which again, look, what a lovely, why wasn't that in there? That would have been a lovely moment. You could have done it and again, I don't like the film, but you could have done it like the Titanic, them going through the haunted halls of this story. If you wanted to show how meaningless it all was, show an old bastard and some lawyer picking through the remains of a criminal empire.
And the thing is movies, while they rarely tackle this subject, movies are like the best art form ever for unreliable narrators. Or like American Animals last year, one of my favourite movies of that year. It's just like Fight Club, unreliable narrator. Like loads of them, they're really, really good. And you could have all of the movie of The Irishman, and obviously better, but then this situation with Brandt, and then you don't even have to say the true story. You can add into the narrative why his testimony is compelling, the parts of it that it's very, very strange that he was able to get right, such as the pattern of blood, the way that Hoffa fell, it was consistent with the crime scene, and then you can just end it with, we don't know if it was true. Yeah, Seems like it was, though, and that's even more compelling.
Yeah, exactly. It could be the greatest. It just not. Yeah, it doesn't even have to be because they purport it as like what happened to him, but you don't need to do that. You could just have it as what happened to him. Portraying it as like one narrative of many, which it is great. I think that would have been wonderful, because then you could compound both. You have your cake and eat it then, because not only can you have it be about that, and the potential untruth of it, you could also have it be about the pointlessness of it all, the age, the fact that irrespective of what happened, it is now lost to time, and that no one person will be able to, probably short of some miracle, or ever actually give a definitive history of this, and all this
Time
struggle,
travel.
bloodshed, money was for basically nothing. Like, the Buffalino family, as far as like I can tell, barely exists anymore. Though again, that is something that Charles Brandt disputes, which I find very interesting. And there's a bunch of like different entities involved in this that are just no longer a thing. Like, I mean, James Hoffa's son is the president of the union still, but it's a vastly diminished union. And like you said, Frank's own children didn't want anything to do with him by the end of it. He drove away one wife, the other one died of natural causes, as far as I'm aware. So like, yeah, what was it all in favor of? That would have been an incredibly poignant topic for a film,
and a perfect closer to. I mean,
it's Scorsese's arc.
Well, yeah,
yeah, no, definitely.
Well, because the thing is he's what he's great at is his innate Catholicism and his Catholic guilt and his pride cometh before the fall, and you see that's in loads of his movies. I mean, it happens to Henry Hill. Henry Hill sells out his brothers. He Judases out. And then ends up with nothing. The Departed, everything, the toxicity of the situation results in everyone dying. This could have taken that to its logical conclusion. What I like about actually Casino is the character of Ace Rothstein. He survives, but loses everything. So he still has his money and he still has his jobs, but Pesci dies, his wife dies, he loses his family, he loses his casinos. But then, because he's just a little bit wilier than everyone else, he gets to carry on doing like accounting or something, and that's it. And you see him. I guess the point is you see him a few years after the events or the final people getting whacked in Casino, because they tried to whack him and they failed to because he was so paranoid and smart. And then it's just him sitting there at his desk, and now he does other stuff, and it's like that's a cold, sad ending. It's like he lived, but he doesn't have anything, and we could have had more of that with this.
Definitely.
Yeah,
you actually no, that's great, because you really made me remember something. This book, Frank is such a big Catholic in that book. Like, the whole reason he confesses is because he is like squaring away with the Lord. Like, and it goes into that briefly in the film with the priest.
Yes.
But how the hell was Martin Scorsese not attracted to that as like you're right, like the entire thing reeks of Catholic guilt. Like, how was the entire film not a confessional? I mean, maybe he got stung by silence. Maybe he was like, I'm avoiding that now. People don't like that anymore.
I have a genuine theory on this. Ooh, actually.
Exciting.
I think that Scorsese did honest manifestations of Catholic guilt in his art when he was younger, because he thought he might survive a lot longer, and that you can defer God. But the problem is Martin Scorsese is old now, and he can't take a nuanced or sometimes like grim approach to faith in the way that I think he used to inadvertently, because Silence was a movie that I was really excited for, but then all of the moral ambiguity or anything that was going to make it interesting about is God actually there was lost, because at the end of the movie it was just like, no, don't worry, even after all that we actually are still Christians. Then you have that like rising score when it turns out that he's in the barrel and he's still got his cross. It's like, yeah, he was a Christian all along. Like, that's a piece of faith propaganda. That's not amusing on, that's not fear and trembling. And I think that he's lost it. I don't think he can have.
You think he's too close now? He's too close to annihilation.
Yeah, he's too close. So he can't. So with Frank, what would be interesting is it's just like, this whole confessional aspect, like you say, run with that hard. But it's like, I don't think Scorsese has it in him to have the narrative be, but can you be forgiven? And in fact, Frank, is there any point? Is there anything there? Because Scorsese will die at some point, probably in the not so near future or near future. So I don't think he can fuck around with that. And I'm not saying that's a problem. Love Scorsese, used to worship him as some kind of minor god, but yeah, I don't think he can do it now. I think he's just got to be like a Jesus.
Yeah, I guess so. That's really tragic. Well, at one point you said probably there, and I thought you were doing that to be safe, just in case he doesn't die. Like in case we invent the cure for death in the next couple of years, and you look really stupid. I was going to respect you for ticking all the boxes there, but.
Always.
The film is a lost opportunity, but like I said, in a way, I think I did enjoy it more than you, but I do think that is nearly entirely down to having read the book, and that's terrible. That is a terrible damning indictment of the film.
Of a film.
Yeah, exactly, which should be a complete product. Can't help but be a bit disappointed. I think if this is the end of his career, which he certainly doesn't think it's going to be, I you know, like you said, actually, it depends on the interview. In one interview, he's got 5 more projects planned. In another one, he's like, I'm dead tomorrow. Like,
No,
I guess
yeah,
that's
see,
what
that
happens when you get old. Maybe you get a bit more. I guess you got to think about it more. But
become touch and go. Yeah.
depends on how he wakes up. If he wakes up feeling bad, he's like, oh, this is it. If he
Yeah,
wakes up feeling
yeah.
good, it's like, oh man, I'm gonna make Goodfellas too. You watch this.
That's the impression, yeah. It's just like, because it's IMDb, obviously, it's still like Sinatra, all these other fucking
Roosevelt
movies he's never
was
gonna
the one, wasn't
make.
it?
Yeah, Roosevelt, which I believe...
Trilogy?
Tell me if I'm right. Yeah, exactly. Trilogy of Roosevelt movies. And then other ones, he's just like, this might be it, this might be it. Marvel sucks, this might be it.
People don't live forever. Marvel sucks. Life's a roller coaster. I'm nearly at the end of the roller coaster.
Oh god, I miss cocaine.
I miss all my friends.
Oh god.
He's still got 3 of his friends though. Actually, that's one I want to talk about this quickly. Apparently, Robert De Niro and Scorsese had to like actually beg Joe Pesci to come back, like to the point of which like the first couple rungs of this film didn't even have him in it. Like they just had to like sadly begrudge that he wasn't going to be there, and then eventually I guess they won him round. I didn't realize how much he hates acting. I thought it was really sad. Like
I didn't really know that until you told me.
Yeah, no, he did an interview. He's done precisely one interview with The Irishman. 2 of you count one interview where he refuses to answer the one question he's asked, which I don't.
Amazing.
He doesn't seem to have any real love for it. But he says he's like maybe thinking about doing more now because he had a moderately good time on The Irishman. But he says he just hates the press. He hates the limelight. He doesn't like pushing a film. He says he wants people to find a film. He doesn't want to like tell them to go. He has nothing but disdain for the people who will like lie about the film they've been in being good on like the interview circuit.
Yeah, fair enough.
Like
good shout to him.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I respect that. But I almost feel sad for the guy because like he seems to be apparently wanted to be a musician, and he is a musician, but like to a much lesser extent than he is of.
He can enjoy music as much as he wants. He's got all the time in the world and all the money for as many instruments.
No, no one's like, I'm not fucking downloading his like new album, which I think is probably what he'd prefer. Yeah, and obviously I don't pity the man. Like he's a fucking millionaire, he can do what he wants. But all I'm saying is like when I'm watching him in that little interview talk about it, like I'm like, oh god, like especially like see if you can find that interview. I think it's like the only premiere he went to, which was the main premiere. He refused to go to any other ones. He's on like a panel where they're doing an interview. He's asked one question, he refuses to answer it, and he looks so sad and miserable to be there. And I'm just like, you should. I think it's the opposite, isn't it? Everyone else is fucking ecstatic. Like Scorsese's finally got the film out. De Niro's got a book he's wanted to adapt for a decade out. Anna Paquin's just happy to be there. Al Pacino's just happy to be there. And like
got to Pesci.
Joe Pesci just looks like he would be singing in the lounge next door. And yeah, give these people more than their due. Much like Prince Andrew. Fuck you, Prince Andrew.
Of course.
But I do. Yeah, you can't help but feel sorry for the guy. Your natural human empathy kicks in for someone who looks that miserable, and also that small. He's so small, especially now he's old. He's even smaller. He'd still kill me probably,
man,
but he's still small.
Who literally has a rap single that I've listened to loads of times.
Amazing. But yeah, where do you wanna go from here, my friend? So we're not done here. The Irishman doesn't get off this easily, and our beloved triumvirate of stars and their dying director don't get off this easily, because like we might have mentioned, this is based on a book. Did you know? And this is based on real life after a book, and that layer of filtration from life to book to film is really interesting, and we hope to go into it more.
So we're planning on doing one or possibly some video essays going into the true history of The Irishman, and we're very excited to do them. So watch this space for that. But in the meantime, we've been Check for Traps.
We certainly have, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much.